We are going back in time to just review the year that's been.
Here he has a house underneath his kitchen that can only be accessed through the pantry.
Bankers upon bankers upon bankers. Shisha. Taifa Care. You know, sometimes these leaders talk to themselves and forget that it's the Kenyans.
I think we haven't seen the last of the effects of that impeachment.
Welcome to Politikali Konekted, a podcast on everything politics and governance in Kenya and Africa. Here we unpack the complexities of people, policy, and power. This is the last episode of the year. So even before we even go any further, hit the subscribe button and follow us on all our social media handles. I'm your host, Ngao,
AKA Madam Speaker, and I am Chaka,
AKA the Bishop. So in this episode, our very last episode of the year 2024, we are going back in time to just review the year that's been. 2024 has been a tough year on Kenyans. Yeah. Actually, maybe around the world, we've seen such unprecedented things, right? So, Chaka, how has been your 2024?
I was thinking about this episode, there's a quote by Vladimir Lenin. And he said that there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen.
Yeah.
2024 has had weeks where decades have happened. And every time we thought we had gotten to the climax of the year in terms of an event or breaking news. Even now, as we review the year, we still have a month in 2024. Between now and our first episode of 2025, we might have to start the year with another review.
A review of December 2024.
Because you can't rule anything out at this point in time.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We had also some interesting news coming out in the beginning of the year from the opposition, where Buffalo Soldier, Mr. Kalonzo Musyoka, was like, I'm not going to back Raila again, leading up to 2027. So there was already talk about 2027, and Kalonzo was like, Mimi hapana. And in the same breath, there was also Kioni, who was leading the Jubilee faction that was in disarray kidogo, saying that we are the ones to unite Mount Kenya and keep William Ruto in check. This is all by the first day of the year. It's not the first quarter, 1st of January. That was what was making the news. So this is still the first day of the year. There's also a spread on the Standard saying that Kenyans hope for lower cost of living coming into 2024. That was their hope.
And that was also, I think, the headline on December 31st, 2023.
Wow.
And there was a survey that showed that this was in the nation, 61% of Kenyans were dissatisfied in the direction of the country.
Yeah.
And of that 61%, more than 90% were
talking about cost of
living. That was followed closely by high taxation. And not too far behind, there was corruption, healthcare, education. Dalili ya mvua ni mawingu.
Hizo mawingu zilikuwa zimeonekana 2023. The clouds were gathering, as Gabriel Oguda would say. But yeah, I feel
they will not believe.
They didn't believe until it happened. Because now when you look at quarter one already, the signs was there. There was William Ruto saying that the opposition is is sabotaging him. Then we have the opposition that's now split. Kalonzo wanting to be the head of Azimio, coming up to 20. And there's also Martha saying that no, she was deputy, so ideally she's the one to run. Like there was so much going on in the opposition. And then there was Kenyans. You know, sometimes these leaders talk to themselves and forget that it's the Kenyans. And then there's the Kenyans, they are waving, saying, excuse me, cost of living.
Yeah.
You know, and it just seemed to be falling on deaf ears as people are already politicking while the cost of living was soaring. And also in the first quarter, now moving past January, in the same first quarter, we see headlines talking about the roles in the Teacher Service Commission on the teachers. We are seeing issues of femicide, because that's a time in January where we had the case of Rita Mweni and many other cases coming up in terms of femicides. And even in February, I think that's when we had the End Femicide KE March, or in January, sorry, it was in January that we had the End Femicide KE March. And how peaceful that protest was, I think, made protests, people reimagine, or rather, let me say, the urban nights, reimagine what it is to protest. Because before it used to be more seen as an ODM thing, mandamano, and teachers and nini, and it just never seemed real that a large majority of people would go to the streets to protest. And the end, for me, how I saw it is at the End Femicide March. It was peaceful. Thousands of women were in the streets, and men, and they were able to deliver their petition. It was good to see.
Yeah, true to it. I think one can't fault Kenyans because the major protests that preceded that were the Azimio protests.
Yes.
And I mean, guns were being fired at
Medias,
vehicles and tear gas canisters into the front windows of cars. And I mean, the scenes from that time. So it a tale of two cities, really.
Yeah. And the first quarter of the year is also where we hear about the AUC candidature, the chairmanship.
At least formally.
At least formally. There was talks of it, but now formally it came up. And there's a headline here on the 16th of February, Raila saying why he wants to be Africa's CEO. And there is where now he became the king of comebacks. Looking like he's coming back. And anyway, that was a heavy quarter, if you look at things now in retrospectively.
Some of the key political issues.
Now we head into quarter two. Coming back from the back of quarter one, now we have quarter two that begins in around April. And something very unprecedented happened. Something that we never expected happening is the death of Major Ogola, Francis Ogola, the head of the Kenya Defense Forces. It was in April, and even as I'm saying this, I'm getting goosebumps because it just didn't seem like this would happen.
Yeah. And it was a shock in many ways to country. And two things come to mind. Number one, a lot of explanation went into trying to explain the circumstances surrounding the incident. And it was in quite defensive tones. And I think what that highlights, without casting aspersions, is the air of mistrust and suspicion that had gripped the country.
Indeed.
And there was a general sense of people were even afraid to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because it sparked the possibility that we had entered a new era of politics that was somewhat reminiscent because it scratched or touched on a trauma of Kenyans because we've had other high-profile deaths that shocked the nation. Thinking about the helicopter crash that took away Saitoti.
Yeah, and Ojode.
Or Ojode. And it was also reminiscent of, other high-profile deaths that just came as a surprise.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a heavy and dark cloud, but the reaction by country, I think, said a lot about the state of things.
After that, we have the fertilizer scandal, where fake fertilizer worth, was it 20 million or billion? Can't remember. I told you there are so many scandals of billion and million. I'm not able to differentiate. But yeah, there was the fertilizer scandal that had the then CS of Agriculture, Politikali appear in Parliament to answer to it. And there's a headline here, wacha niwasome, where he says that he claims that the fertilizer was real. And yet the fertilizer was brought to Parliament, and the parliamentarians, in the video of the parliamentarians looking in it, and ni kama ilikuwa tu kokoto. Yeah. And by the way, as this is happening on the fertilizers, there's also the massive floods that we started to see in various parts of the country. And I remember the meteorological department had put out an advisory that there will be floods, or was it was a hurricane something? Was it I can't remember. But anyway, there was floods that were, or rather what
a cyclone, I think.
A cyclone, yeah. And what they were saying would be possible, what do they call it?
El Nino.
And flash floods. And just a few weeks before that, after that announcement was made by the meteorological department, we see a presser at the steps of Harambee House, and the then deputy president, Rigathi Gachagua, is standing with them. I guess it was the disaster management committee, I don't know. And the director general of the meteorological department had to recant.
Yes, to eat his words.
Only for the country to see massive loss of livelihoods during the floods. And there was little disaster response, or rather, they felt that there were some places that they were being given, I think it was 10,000 per household to resettle. And there was a push for all these people who had lost their belongings for the government to waive their ID fees because it was a natural disaster. But that didn't see the light of day because politics was politicking as well.
Yeah, and there was a lot of money that had been set aside for in anticipation, and which I think there were questions around accountability for that. But not to take us back, the floods happening so soon after we lost General Ogola felt symbolic as to, things, quite a number of things happening in the country.
Yeah.
And that there was a sense of things being overwhelming. So that was a heavy quarter two.
Yeah. And still in quarter two, there's a headline here saying Cabinet of Blunders. And the picture is of former Health Minister Susan Nakumincha, former Road CS Kipchumba Murkomen, former Agriculture CS Politikali Nturi, former Educational CS Ezekiel Machogu, and former Trade Minister Moses Kuria. That was a headline that they are making blunders. It's basically almost saying a cabinet of failures.
Yeah. So what you get with the a bitter government.
Yeah. But let's fast forward kidogo to a very exciting thing. The American tour. That led to the Hustler Jet and the friends from Dubai.
Coming to America.
Hey, man. Probably that was a scene. But yeah, we have just in the middle of Q2, end of May, we have the president of Kenya go on a very illustrious American tour. And the media publicity at that time, man, it just seemed, this is a darling of the West. What a man. What a government. Wow. Uncle Sam was just like, yes. Only to come back and reject finance bill.
He came back to, I wanted to say Kasongo while you were away. It was his version of Baba while you were away. Because things were really picking up, because there were already sentiments online.
Yes.
Planning for these protests. There were even major international publications saying that that tour was a miscalculation on the part of the U.S. administration and also the immediate former U.S. ambassador to Kenya.
Meg Whitman.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think also just to touch on, with the growing economic tribulations we were facing as a country, we had the Hustler Jet that was put into question, and now the president having to explain that this was a gift.
Yeah.
They offered me, I think it was 10 million, compared to spending 200 and something million. And
this it was a national prayer breakfast.
Yeah, it was. It
was
during the national prayer breakfast. And I guess the intent of sharing this information was to calm down people, but not realizing. Now, when I look back at the time, at the number of things that happened in the past leading on to this, people, the anger
temperature was rising.
Here.
Yeah.
That the more explaining the government or the head of state was making, it was just fanning the
Actually, when you
flames.
think about it, we don't hear from the president as much as we used to.
Yeah.
And that's in keeping with the trend with former presidents who, after a time in the office, they realize, hey, but talk too much is no good idea. And people would rather see action and real change. And I think that US tour was his last major trip outside of the country. Yeah,
there's actually a headline that says the king of the skies, because he was tour after tour after tour.
And interestingly, this was the second Hustler Jet scandal.
Oh, there was yes. Just when he became president.
When he became deputy president, the first term of Uhuru Kenyatta, there was a Hustler Jet scandal.
Oh.
Yeah. And the figures were also controversial at the time.
So when all this is happening, there's politics happening on the ground. You're seeing UDAs fighting and all this. But anyway, all this came to a halt towards the end of June. June 18th was the first Reject Finance Bill protest. And that seemed, actually, when I look at the headlines, it didn't even take a headline. Like, the headline on June 19th is Ruto beats retreat amid tax protests. And then the next headline the next day is UDA death. Ruto crafts giant party. So you see the politics is not happening while the people on the ground are, like hot springs, bubbling up until we get to June 25th. And I was talking to you earlier and I was saying, my world changed completely.
Yeah, it's like the year started afresh at that point.
Yeah, it was.
A country was never to be the same again.
Yeah.
That was to go back to Lenin, a week when decades happened.
Yeah, that was a week that absolutely true.
Yeah.
My last memory of Q2 is just after the June protests. I mean, the 25th of June, and sitting in my couch at night, and I remember the president was addressing the nation around 9 p.m. And you could see, I still have that picture so etched in my mind, a visible angry man. And he's like, you treasonous criminals trying to unseat me. You know, you will face the full force of the law. And I was like, how can't you not hear the people?
And I think there was a headline around that time of enough is enough.
Yes, enough is enough. Ruto warns Gen Zs.
Although, to be honest, I think that speech was directed to
Political players and movers.
Political players close to home.
Yeah.
Because, interestingly, at such a moment, you would expect that the president would have his deputy standing beside him. And we also remember that in that first half of the year, having gone through Q1 and Q2, the deputy president kept telling us that he's listening to the ground. He's listening to the ground. And then he later comes to tell us that the national intelligence is failing at their
to
job.
advise the government.
And then you have a major purge in national intelligence because of perceived sympathizers to the DP. So why I say all that, then when you listen to the president's speech with that in mind, it takes on a very different tone. And that's part of the reality of our politics.
Yeah. I could say is that politics was happening while people were speaking. And when this hot spring of Gen Z protests bubbled up to the ground, I feel like the president's speech on 25th was what you are saying. It was not speaking to what the actual hot spring that had bubbled up, but it was more speaking to, the way sometimes politicians speak at to each other, forgetting that the ground is here and is speaking back to them. But now let me take us now to Q3, because Q3 is just at the backdrop of the finance bill protests. And there's clamor to dissolve parliament or dissolve cabinet, and the president dissolves cabinet. Actually, there's a heading here saying the Last Supper. This is even before cabinet was
and
dissolved.
Even before he does that, he withdraws the finance bill.
Yes.
Which was that was a first major pivot.
Yeah.
We see. And it highlighted something very interesting about our politics as well, because the parliamentarians forced through the finance bill only to really applaud, almost giving a standing ovation when the president withdrew it.
Yeah. And actually they passed the finance bill in a record 30 minutes. Just yes. That's why they were saying dissolve parliament. That's why there was clamor to dissolve parliament. Interesting. And so we enter Q3 with Broadway's nusu mkate, not nusu mkate, government.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Right, and there is actually here a headline saying a missing opposition because of the ongoing talks with before now the Broadway's government came into being, of talks with ODM to join William Ruto's government after he dissolved cabinet. And then we also see a headline saying Gachagua is running out of options. Mind you, while all this is happening, there's also the undercurrent or something that's happening with the continued abductions. There was also Saba protests that really didn't become as big as the Gen Z protests. And
but something that did have the nation on tenterhooks was Kenyans cheering for the army. Yes.
Yeah, the army was deployed.
The army was deployed, and something that was reminiscent of 1982. And instead of people being scared, they were happy and elated and running alongside
the army. Yeah, and let me ask, wasn't that the first time since 1982 for the army to be deployed on Kenyan streets?
I think, well, the first major time. There may have been another instance or two, but that was the first major time they were
on the streets, and there was see, quarter 3 iliwapeleka. I mean, quarter 2 was quite something. Okay. So in the same quarter 3, we have a Nusu Mkate government. We have ODM saying that they have not joined government, yet their top lieutenants had joined government. We have Gachagua running out of options. I don't know what options are these, because then he was deputy president. I don't know whether he was seeking something else. And then we have the famous Jimmy Wanjigi, I don't know what to call it. Escapade, or the attempt to arrest him. Yes. And the police raided his house and spent, I think, a day or two looking for him, to arrest him for, was it sponsoring the protests? And Jimmy Wanjigi was nowhere to be found. Alikuwa wapi Chaka?
Here he has a house underneath his kitchen that can only be accessed through the pantry.
Bankers upon bankers.
I don't know. That's I wouldn't know. But something else that happened at the beginning of quarter 3 is we had the launch of the Politically Connected podcast.
Yay! Shangwena Pigelagale!
What an interesting time to start a podcast about politics.
I know, in the back of everything that's happened. Yeah, I don't think even we had this purview.
We did not. We had a few attempts at recording our first episode.
Yeah.
But we came in at a time when there was so much to talk about and unpack.
There was so much to unpack, and there was so much expecting us.
Yes.
Because of the impeachment, tulikuwa syllabus ilikuwa inaharakishwa. Yeah. So wow, quarter 3 was a big one. I'd even forgotten. Imagine, to me, I feel like tumekuwa na hii podcast tangu January. Wow. Shout out to all you subscribers and viewers of Politically Connected. It is because of you we are seated here unpacking people, policy, and power. So, sasa niko excited hadi sijui tusonge mbele aje. So a very interesting headline here. And it is, I won't tell you what it is about. I'm just going to read it out. A season of betrayal. What comes to mind when you hear that headline? And this is in August 2024.
I'm a little affected by a headline from Nation from around that time that was talking about Uhuru Kenyatta's betrayers. So when you said that, I remember that headline from Nation.
Okay.
So I didn't stand a chance. What was it about?
It was the opposition feeling betrayed by ODM for taking half the mkate and leaving them with nothing. That was it, a season of betrayal. And I think it also touched a bit on the former deputy president. It seemed that the clouds were now gathering on his side. Also in quarter 3 is where we see Adani pop up and more news of the Adani deal for JKIA and Ketako, the energy deal, and Shisha, Taifa Care is brought into well, basically the ghost of Adani is in these key dockets, and there's a Stop Adani clamor. There was even an attempt to occupy JKIA.
I'll say this. I think the real test, at least for me, for Adani and is going to be the JKIA deal that eventually emerges, because it will reveal, it may reveal the real interested parties in pushing this narrative. Because sometimes, however real the issues are, however passionate people are, the fact is, in politics, in history, the world over, people are used as pawns for private agendas.
Yeah.
So this Adani deal is not over until we see, because a deal will still be necessary unless CS Buddy and CS Churchill work some magic and have Kenyans pay for the airport, because one of the arguments that was being made is Kenyans can afford to rebuild and expand, renovate the airport. So unless we go in that direction, if it's PPP, I'd be very interested to see how that deal is structured and who is behind it.
Yeah. And that, even before we go ahead of that, you guys need to see our episode on the JKA Adani deal. We'll link it below here if you haven't watched it already, because there's so much that goes, there's so much from what the bishop here is talking about that we unpack on the Adani deal. And now we head into quarter 4. Hey, already at the end of quarter 3, it just seemed that DP Hamik, yeah. I mean, we already saw different headlines of he's running out of time, that if Rigathi falls, imagine that's a headline. Ruto locks out his friends. I feel like there's already a priming. The case against Rigathi Gachagua, that was the 1st of October. There was already some key signs that
the clouds were gathering.
The clouds, the storm was here.
And even
the storm he was denying that the meteorological department has arrived at his doorstep.
Yeah, and it was the first impeachment in the presidency that Kenyans have seen.
Yeah, and it was swift and it was heavy and it had us glued, at least for me, to our phones and the TVs, just looking at social media and seeing how. But something very interesting popped up for me during that time is that in the same swiftness and unity that we saw as the MPs passed their rejected finance bill, or let me say the withdrawn finance bill, is the same energy we saw in the impeachment of the deputy president. A very serious impeachment motion that has never been done. So meaning that if this is the first time, it is setting precedents. And we just saw, rubber stamp. I'm not saying that he did not have ground, there could have not been grounds for impeachment. I feel like the manner in which it was carried out really sets us below par when it comes to the precedence of impeaching a head of state. And in quarter 3, it's where already there was tensions between the judiciary and the executive. And then also included the legislature. The 3 arms of government. And then we see a heading here saying politics versus the law. And we see in this headline, we see the picture of the current sitting president, William Ruto, the former deputy president, Rigathi Gachagua, and in the middle, who do we have? The Chief Justice, Madam Martha Koome, and the two speakers of the National Assembly and the Senate.
The Senate.
Yeah, and it was an interesting. I'm saying this because I also want these guys, you guys, to head over and see that episode where we unpack the complexities, because what happened during the impeachment process, and Bishop can speak more here as our learned friend. We saw how politics and the law can really not be separate, or if they are separate, there's always a vocabulary line.
On the impeachment, the one comment I would want to make before we proceed is I think we haven't seen the last of the effects of that impeachment.
Yeah, and in this quarter 3, quarter 4, we're at quarter 4, which is not yet complete as we are recording this. We saw the same church or the same religious leaders that were used to campaign, or used, their pulpits were used for political gain, hold a very mighty, earth-shattering, I could say earth-shattering because it was the caucus of the bishops.
Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops. Yeah. But allow me to say something about that. It's interesting that there was a headline in The Nation from the beginning of quarter 2.
Yeah.
Where the bishops were also sounding a warning about the cost of living and the taxes and the like.
Yes.
But also there's also a temptation, so to speak, to bunch all the clergy together.
Put all of them, just together. As I've done, like bunch all religious leaders into one basket.
It's like bunching all politicians together.
Yeah.
But we do have politicians who are principled and who stand for something. Yeah. We can name quite a few. So,
still in this quarter in November, a couple of things happened. We begin the new month with a new deputy president, Mr.
Abrake.
Hey, I'm calling him Mr. Naini Doctor.
Professor.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Professor.
Our second professor to be deputy president or vice president. Yeah.
Professor Kithure Kindiki Abraham.
Abrake.
And then in that same month, we have the State of the Nation address, where there was also a planned protest around the same day. And the president says, we have stopped Adani. Adani is no more. Yeah, which was...
the same morning.
Yeah.
CS... Pio and I was in Parliament defending it. And a lot of people wondered, is this a government that speaks to each other? However, there are some decisions which are
left.
The preserve of the president, because, that invitation to the CS and the issues he was speaking to. And I think I also said this previously, in his defense, he may have been wearing his lawyer's hat.
And then we finish off the quarter, or rather, it's not yet finished, but we pause the quarter after with the former deputy president going on television. He was
a tell-all interview.
Yeah, but he was leading to the interview. He was attending a funeral service in Limuru, where goons took over and caused a lot of havoc, including in his car, but they were able to get away. Then we had an MP that was also...
Former MP abducted.
Oh yeah, former MP was abducted and released later on at night. And even
Peter Murphy, yeah.
An MCA as well. And then now the deputy president is like, let me address and say...
There's a allow me to get a bit poetic. There's a song by John Mayer where he sings about slow dancing in a burning room. We are playing with fire.
Tunacheza na
There's some games that are really dangerous.
I agree with you. I'd never thought I'd get to a point to agree with Rigathi Gachagua, but I only agree with him to one point. That the moment organized gangs are used to manage politics, it is a dance with fire that we don't even know where it will go. It's like, I don't know. It's something you can't contain, because once
Takes a life of its own.
you know, once you embolden them with the protection or just the way they're able to maneuver and cause all this havoc, how do you stop them? When Sawa, you've managed the politics, and then how do you stop them?
I don't want to. Maybe this may not be the appropriate example or to liken it, but it reminds me of studies in history where Taliban, led by Osama, were armed by the Americans to fight against the Russians. And after that had happened, it took a life of its own, or so we think.
Yeah, I feel like we are in, or rather, some of the things that are happening in our country, from the abductions, the killings, the femicide, there's just so much that's happening that I personally think we are traumatized. You know, leave alone even the other things that have happened before 2024. There's so much that has happened, especially after June 2024, that seemed to be swept under the rug.
And I think that's why the Gen Z process were really inspiring to the older generations, so to speak. Especially the is it what are they called? The Gen X.
Gen X's, yeah.
Yeah. Because that trauma that you speak of, people are so tired. It's just one thing after another, after another, after another, after another. And it gets exhausting. And so that was a spark, for people to really stand up.
Yeah.
So even what's happening now, I think that's part of the anxiety we have for 2025. What major moments are you looking forward to in our politics in 2025?
Hata siwezi answer, because I feel like kila kitu, everything is
Everywhere.
I'm hoping for, as a Kenyan, I'm hoping for a better environment to do business. I'm hoping for more sanity, especially when it comes to taxation. I realize that, yes, we do need to raise our revenue, but I'm hoping for just some intentional measures to also safeguard the working mwananchi. Yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to. Do I know whether it's happening? No. But if you ask me in terms of siasa, ni kama hiyo episode ya Game of Thrones, hujui itaanza aje ama itamalizika aje.
Well, some of the things we can anticipate is February AUC.
Actually, I think that is actually the real New Year's of Kenya. Hiyo inafaa kuwa the New Year.
That should be interesting. And there are whispers that the political class are pulling in different directions. Some want Mzee to get it. Others want him to get it, but would prefer if he stays in the country to help stabilize our politics. Because remember, when he started his bid at the beginning of the year, we didn't have a Broadway's Mkata government. And I think another thing, whether it will happen this December or come the new year, I anticipate it should happen in the new year, is that we may see quite a number of new faces in the class of principal secretaries.
Oh, another reshuffle.
Yeah, well, that one is a public service, so the interviews and appointments should be interesting, but it will say a lot. But we may also see a cabinet reshuffle, because remember, there are 2 slots that are still empty. So
Wait, we've been living without 2 dockets, that is?
Well, there was gender.
Gender.
And now we don't have a substantive interior.
Oh, yeah,
CS.
because...
Yes, so we have an acting one in the prime CS. So that should also be interesting. So politics is still going to be spicy.
And there are many other things. There's
Indeed.
Kalonzo joining Gema.
Kamba joining Gema, not Kalonzo.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, wait. I take it back. Take it back.
But it speaks to the owners of things. You can see what the plan is. So the Freudian slip is...
Anyway, yeah, we have the Akamba joining the Gema community. We have a couple of parties that have made the decision to leave the Azimio coalition. Yeah, and we have Okiya Omtata saying that he'll run for presidency. We have Matiang'i.
He hasn't announced.
He hasn't announced, but he has whispers.
He has, those consultants from
Canada. He's made some significant steps.
Let me say it here: if we do get to elections in 2027, and I say if because
because that's my question.
If we do get to elections in 2027,
when we get to elections, okay. If
were there elections in 2022, or was there a selection? So if we get to elections, the thing is, there's so many possibilities. I think there's a lot that could happen between now and 2027.
Yeah.
As much as you saw Chararke's constitutional amendment bill being defeated, it did open the floor for constitutional amendments to be discussed. We've only had 1 or 2 bills adopted from NADCO. So
there's still more to come.
And that may change the timeline of our politics. It may interrupt our politics as we know it. So that's why I'm saying if... remember, there's also the issue of whether Parliament should be dissolved.
The advisory to dissolve.
So if we get to 2027, I think we're going to have a situation where we have a runoff. Yes.
The last time I had runoff, don't take me back there.
It was during the 2022 selection.
Yeah. Just feels.
But in this instance, the political field, at least in 2022, you had 2 major formations. You were talking about the Americans in the last episode and their 2-party system. That one, we've had under the 2010 Constitution 2 major formations at any one point.
Yeah.
Whether we'll be able to galvanize and organize our politics in the same way with a whole new generation of voters, which is why also I think we're having controversies with our national IDs.
Bishop, do you know how many things you're saying in that one statement? Umesema vitu mingi. Wow, I think as we start the year, we need to have a larger discussion on seeing what we expect for 2025.
A forecast.
Yeah, a forecast. So that brings us to the end of our last episode of 2024. Tupigie makofi. We made it to the end of the year, and we are thankful and grateful for you guys to be joining us on this journey. So if you haven't already, just click subscribe hapo tu sai. Click subscribe, follow us on social media. Would like to hear from you, by the way. Ninyi ndio mnachangia episodes zetu. The more we hear from you, the more we are able to also share some of our insights. You have ideas of what you'd want on the podcast, give us a shout on our comment section. Lakini sisi, our policy in our comment sections ni comments
Fupi fupi.
Fupi fupi. So that brings us to the end. We wish you well. Happy festivities. May you enjoy, and we'll see you in the new year.
Mubarikiwe, mubarikiwe, mubarikiwe.
It is so poetic how the bishop ends our year. And that is why we call him the bishop.
See you soon on a screen near you.